The sixth studio album from the French heavy metal group Gojira offers up a project that's steeped in the themes of death, loneliness, and a desire to move on from experiencing hurt and become a more rounded person because of these experiences. Originally abandoned after the death of the mother of band members Joe and Mario Duplantier, the group returned to complete the album after their last tour, and what results is Magma, an emotional roller coaster of an album where pretty much all hope is to be abandoned. Don't expect much in the way of rainbows and waterfalls here, unless they are rainbows of black and grey and waterfalls of misery. The opening track, The Shooting Star, is about the recent death of a loved one, possibly alluding to the death of the brother's mother, and the protagonist is hoping for some sort of sign from the other side that everything's alright. A similar scenario is found on the album's penultimate song, Lowlands, where during the contact phase and with some stark imagery, our lead wants to know what's waiting on the other side. The use of death and desolation is used as a metaphor on the track Silvera, where despite all the misery being piled onto anyone going through a tough time, Joe attempts to reassure those listening that they must use these moments to become a better, stronger person as a result and strive for more, which is the same story on the track Only Pain. One of the underlying emotions that are present throughout this album is the notion of hopelessness, despair and destitution. The track The Cell encompassing all of these emotions, which sees our lead being consumed by an ever-present darkness and just desires for a release from these thoughts and feelings that haunt him. Prey sees our lead hitting complete rock bottom, having lost complete and utter faith in all of humanity, and simply desires to create a world for him alone where he will be able to thrive and prosper without having to face the real world's misery. The track Stranded mimics the previously mentioned emotions, only this time our lead desires for their significant other to not leave them wallowing in this state, and pleads for them to help him through the darkness. One of the more odd inclusions to this album, yet undeniably enjoyable nonetheless, is the album's titular track, which sees to read as our lead going through what can only be described as a drugs trip, and encapsulates the enjoyment of being free and ridding themselves of life's woes, if be it only for a temporary amount of time. The final two tracks, Yellowstone and Liberation, are both instrumentals, with the first coming in at the halfway point and the second bookending the album. The first barely clocks in at a minute 20, and the last track is a pretty empty and overall unnecessary inclusion. I'm guessing that the band wanted a more angelic ending to what is a very grim album, which is why it's the only acoustic driven track on the album, and it tries to represent a light at the end of the tunnel moment, but for me it doesn't mesh with the album at all and is a pretty weak ending. Instrumentally, the group has gone on record saying that they wanted to focus on creating a more compact album, something described as being less epic with more of a focus on punchier grooves and riffs, and for the most part the group succeed. The best example being Stranded, personally my favourite track on the whole album, where the track opens up with a stellar punchy guitar opening which continues into a fantastic groove in the verses. The combination of frenetic drums and guitar rhythm which packs some real heaviness on The Cell is another highlight. Magma, being the longest track at over 6.5 minutes, does well in maintaining the listener's attention, showcasing another strong combination of riffs, rhythms and a decent guitar solo towards the final third of the song. The mixing of the guitars on the track Only Pain has a sense of wildness to it that maintains its energy throughout, and the distortion of the guitars that opens up the album on the track The Shooting Star, with the overall turgid delivery coming off really strong. But I would be lying if I said that this album didn't have some problems. The mixing on Lowlands is a bit too washed out, which makes for a difficult time in understanding what's being sung. Silvera can also experience the same issues sometimes, but the mixing is handled way better than it is on the latter, and despite its great build up and displaying perhaps one of the strongest instrumentals on the album, the lyrical sparseness on Prey does leave me wanting a hell of a lot more desolation and darkness. It does feel somewhat empty in that regards. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid album from the group. Whilst opting for a more controlled and particular style of playing as opposed to the balls to the wall style, the group creates a focused and concise album that for the most part succeeds in delivering a dark and brooding mood. I do think some of the mixing could have been a lot clearer, and there are some moments that whilst the songwriting isn't bad, I would have liked it if the group had embraced more of a darker edge and really pushed their imagery a little further. Also, give the bass guitar some space to be more expressive, and dumping the final instrumental would have been a blessing as well. But regardless of these gripes, there's more than enough to hold your attention and interest that I can't help but find myself recommending this album, even to non-metal heads like myself. Overall, I score this album a 76 out of 100.